Imagine driving through the desolate California highway at night, when you pull into a gas station that feels rotten. The lights flicker, the attendant is way too quiet, and strange things start to happen. Every stop at these eerie, forgotten stations hides a dark secret. From time loops and ghostly figures to sinister forces you can't escape. Each story will make you question what's lurking just beyond the glow of the pump. Stay with us as we dive into 10 chilling tales. Watch till the end, because you won't believe how they all connect. Are you ready for the truth? Story 10. The gas station that time forgot it had been a long, tiring drive for Jack. The road stretched endlessly in front of him. Nothing but the same barren landscape of California's desert roads. The sun had long set, and the dark night sky cast an eerie silence over the highway. He had been driving for hours, fighting against exhaustion, with nothing but the dim glow of his headlights to guide him through the desolation. Jack had always been the kind of person who enjoyed road trips, but this one had been different. He had been on the road longer than he intended, far from the city, and the only company he had was the hum of his car's engine and the occasional crackling sound from the radio. Then, like a strange mirage in the distance, he saw it, a gas station. The neon lights flickered in the otherwise pitch-black horizon. A welcome sight, considering he was running low on fuel. As Jack drove closer, he noticed how isolated it was. No other cars were in sight, no buildings, no towns, just the gas station, standing alone in the middle of nowhere. The bright, flashing lights of the sign almost felt too bright for such a desolate place. The pump, illuminated by the harsh overhead lamps, seemed to glow unnaturally. He pulled in, his tires crunching on the gravel as he parked next to the lone pump. The station was old, its paint chipped and faded, but it seemed to be in working order. He stepped out of his car, stretching his legs, and walked toward the pump. There was a strange feeling in the air, a quiet heaviness that he couldn't shake off. He brushed it off as his tired mind playing tricks on him. The door to the small convenience store creaked open, and a man stepped out. His face was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes lacked any real expression. He gave Jack a slow, deliberate nod before turning toward the pump. "Fill her up," the man asked, in a voice that sounded too tired, too lifeless. "Yeah, please," Jack said, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling creeping up his spine. He had been driving for hours, and all he wanted was to get back on the road. As the man began to pump the gas, Jack looked around. The gas station was almost deserted. No other cars, no people. The silence was almost deafening. There wasn't even the usual buzzing of insects or the distant sound of wildlife. Just silence. Jack glanced at his watch, which was already past midnight. A deep sense of unease settled in, but he couldn't put his finger on why. Maybe it was just the loneliness of the place, or the exhaustion that was starting to cloud his thoughts. "Long night?" Jack asked, trying to make small talk. The man didn't respond immediately. He just kept pumping the gas, his eyes staring ahead blankly, as if Jack hadn't spoken at all. "Yeah," the man finally said. Long night." Jack frowned, unsure what to make of that cryptic response. He decided not to press the issue. He had enough weirdness on his plate already, once. The gas was filled. Jack handed the man his credit card. The man took it, swiped it, and handed it back without saying a word. Jack noticed something odd as he looked at the register screen. It was stuck on the same time. It was still 12:03 a.m., even though several minutes had passed. "Your cards." Been accepted, the man muttered, handing back the receipt. Jack took it, still feeling a little uneasy. "Thanks," he said, trying to brush off the oddness of the situation. As he got back into his car, the station seemed to grow quieter, as if the world itself had held its breath. He started the engine, but something felt wrong. The headlights flickered before fully coming on, and the air grew colder, despite the heat of the desert night. It was as if time had slowed down around him. He glanced at the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of something strange, a figure in the distance, standing still near one of the other pumps. He blinked, but when he looked again, the figure was gone. "Just tired," he muttered, shaking his head. Nothing to worry about. But the unease wouldn't leave him. Jack began to pull away, but as he looked forward, the gas station seemed to grow larger in his vision, stretching outward as if pulling him back. Then it hit him. He'd been driving for hours, but the gas station was still there, standing, exactly as it had been when he arrived. And when he looked at his watch again, it read 12:03 a.m. Jack slammed on the brakes, his heart skipping a beat. He stared at the gas station, then at his watch. He looked around the empty road, but nothing was different. It was as if the world had stopped moving. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. It's just a glitch in the system. Maybe the watch is malfunctioning, he reasoned with himself. He turned the car round and drove back to the gas station. The flickering neon lights greeted him as he pulled in once again, the same as before. The attendant stood there, motionless. This time, when Jack approached the pump, the man didn't speak, only gave him a blank stare. It felt like the world had just reset itself, as if nothing had changed. Jack felt a sudden cold sweat break out on his forehead. I'm sorry, did I just leave?" he asked the man, his voice shaking slightly. The man didn't answer. His eyes remained blank, almost lifeless. Jack didn't know what to do. He couldn't understand what was happening. Had he been dreaming? Was this some sort of hallucination brought on by exhaustion? His mind raced as he sat in the car, trying to process the impossible situation. But before he could make a decision, his car's headlights flickered again, casting strange, ghostly shadows on the pavement. He glanced around quickly, his heart pounding in his chest, but nothing was moving. No cars, no people, just the gas station, standing still. Finally, he decided to leave. There was something off about the place, something that felt deeply wrong, like he wasn't supposed to be there. He started the car again, and this time, he drove faster, determined to escape the strange sensation that clung to him. But as he looked in his rearview mirror, the gas station was still there. It hadn't moved, hadn't changed at all. And the clock on his dashboard, 12:03 a.m. This time, it was different. A sinking feeling began to take hold of Jack's stomach as he drove further down the road. He kept glancing at his watch, and the same time stared back at him, 12:03 a.m. He tried to turn around again, but the road seemed to stretch on forever. The landscape around him became more distorted, as if the world itself was slowly bending and twisting, pulling him back to that damned station. He slammed on the brakes, panic rising in his chest. Everything around him was different. The car's interior was now bathed in an unnatural glow, and the road had disappeared, replaced by an endless, foggy abyss. In the distance, he could see the faint outline of the gas station growing closer. No matter how far he drove, he had no choice but to turn the car around once more. The gas station was waiting for him, its flickering neon sign mocking his every attempt to escape. The clock on his dashboard still read 12:03 a.m., As he parked in front of the station once again, Jack realized with dawning horror that he wasn't in control anymore. The world around him was stuck in a loop, and he was trapped in it. The attendant was still there, his pale face never changing, his eyes vacant. This time, Jack didn't even bother to speak. There was no point. No matter what he did, no matter how many times he tried to leave, the clock would always read 12:03 a.m. The gas station would always pull him back. Jack's heart thudded in his chest as he realized the horrifying truth. He was stuck in a place where time didn't exist, where the laws of reality had no hold, and where every attempt to escape only led him back to the same place. And as the flickering lights of the station illuminated the dark, endless desert, Jack knew that there was no way out. The gas station had become his prison, and time had forgotten him. He was never going to leave. Story 9. The silent vigil. The desert was unnervingly quiet. The dry wind, which should have been carrying the sounds of distant wildlife, was silent. Not even the occasional chirping of a lonesome insect could be heard. Only the sound of his tires crunching against the asphalt broke the stillness. Mark had been driving for what felt like hours, and he was more than ready to stop. The sun had long since set, and he was on the edge of exhaustion. He needed to refuel, and so, when he saw the faint glow of a gas station appear in the distance, he didn't hesitate. It was a small, run-down station that seemed out of place in the vast emptiness of the California desert. The neon lights flickered in a half-hearted attempt to keep the station illuminated, casting an eerie glow across the cracked concrete and peeling walls. There wasn't a single other car in sight. Mark couldn't even see the outline of a town. Nearby, just the gas station, standing alone as if it had been forgotten by time. As he pulled in and parked next to the nearest pump, he felt an odd sensation, a kind of pressure in the air that he couldn't quite explain. It wasn't the kind of pressure that warned of a storm, nor was it the heat of the desert, no. It was something deeper, something unsettling. Shaking off the feeling, he stepped out of the car, stretching his stiff limbs. His body ached, but he was too tired to care. He'd only been on the road for a few hours, but he felt as though he had been driving for days. His phone had no signal, which was unusual for this part of California, but he didn't dwell on it. He approached the gas pump, inserted the nozzle into his car, and began fueling. It wasn't until he turned back to the station itself that he noticed something strange. A group of people stood outside the store, lined up like sentinels. They weren't talking. In fact, they weren't doing anything at all. They simply stood, motionless, facing forward, their bodies almost perfectly still. There were at least 7 or 8 of them, dressed in a variety of clothing, their faces indistinguishable in the darkness, save for the occasional gleam of a pale eye under the dim light. Mark felt a chill crawl up his spine. He couldn't tell why, but something about the way they stood there felt wrong. They weren't engaging with each other. They weren't moving. They didn't even acknowledge his presence as he finished pumping the gas, trying to shake the unease. Mark walked toward the store, his feet scraping against the gravel. He needed to get a drink and stretch his legs, maybe ask the clerk about the strange group outside. The air grew colder as he approached, but he ignored the shiver running down his spine. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. A blast of cold air greeted him. The small interior of the convenience store was just as decrepit as the outside dusty shelves, faded posters on the walls, and a single clerk behind the counter. The clerk's face was expressionless, his eyes barely moving as Mark approached. "Can I help you?" The clerk asked in a low, monotone voice. "Yeah, just some water," Mark replied, nodding toward the cooler at the back. His eyes flicked back to the door, briefly catching the figures outside. Still standing perfectly still, the clerk didn't respond. He simply turned to retrieve the water, his movements mechanical, like a puppet following a script. Mark could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He grabbed the bottle of water from the cooler, paying for it without much thought. As he turned to leave, his curiosity got the better of him, and he hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the group of figures outside. They were still unmoving. There was no reason for them to be there. No reason to stand perfectly still for so long in such an odd formation. "Who are they?" Mark asked, before he could stop himself. The clerk didn't even look up. He simply mumbled, "They've always been there." Mark frowned, the unease in his stomach growing. He walked out of the store and headed back to his car. The group of figures hadn't moved an inch, though they seemed ... closer now, just a little bit. But it was enough to make Mark's heart skip a beat. He started his car, his hands shaking slightly as he put it in gear. He told himself to just leave. He didn't need to worry about strange people in the desert. He had places to be. But as he glanced in his rearview mirror, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The figures were moving, not walking, not even turning their heads. They were ... shifting, in a way that shouldn't have been possible. The way their bodies contorted in perfect synchrony, like puppets on invisible strings, made Mark's stomach churn. The figures seemed to glide, silently approaching the car. He didn't wait to see what they'd do next. Slamming his foot on the accelerator, Mark sped out of the parking lot, his tires screeching as he whipped the car onto the deserted highway. But even as he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something he couldn't explain. He kept looking in the rearview mirror, and each time he did, the figures were closer, moving with unnatural speed, gliding across the gravel-like shadows. They didn't run, they didn't walk. They simply moved closer and closer until their presence loomed over him. He could hear the faintest sound in his head, a low, almost imperceptible hum. It was distant at first, but it grew louder, like the buzz of a fly caught in his mind. Mark shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. But then, a jolt of realization hit him. The road in front of him wasn't stretching out as it should. It was ... warping. The dark landscape ahead was shifting, the horizon bending and distorting like a mirage. His pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. He looked around, but there was nothing, just the endless, empty desert stretching out into infinity. The figures, they weren't behind him anymore. He turned round quickly, his heart pounding in his chest, and found himself staring back at the gas station, now impossibly far away, but looming over the horizon. The lights flickered again, casting shadows across the station that felt too ... familiar. He hadn't been driving for more than a few miles. No, that wasn't possible. Mark slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as he came to a sudden stop. In the middle of the road, his hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. He stared in disbelief at the empty road before him, his breathing shallow. Was this some kind of prank? A hallucination? Was he trapped in some twisted version of reality? The hum in his head grew louder, now almost deafening. It wasn't just the figures anymore. It was something else, something older, something ancient, vibrating through the very fabric of the air. Mark's hands were trembling. He looked down at the dashboard. The clock read 12:03 a.m. the same time it had shown when he first arrived at the gas station. His heart stopped in his chest. The road didn't lead anywhere anymore. The horizon didn't stretch into a future. It was as if the world itself had folded back on itself, trapping him in an endless loop in the gas station. The figures, they were all a part of it. There was no escape. Panic clawed at his throat. He tried to turn around again, to drive back, but the car wouldn't budge. It was like the road had ceased to exist, like it was nothing more than a shadow of its former self. The figures were there, standing at the edge of the horizon, their bodies shifting and contorting like grotesque marionettes. But now there was something worse. Their eyes. They were glowing faintly, a sickly, pale green, watching him from afar. And then, in the distance, he heard a voice. It wasn't loud, but it was there, deep in his mind, like an echo, a whisper. You're one of us now. Mark's heart raced as the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He wasn't just stuck in a loop. He was part of it. The figures, the endless night, the gas station that never ended. He was now a part of their vigil, trapped in this twisted purgatory with no hope of escape. As the whispering continued, louder and louder, Mark realized with horror that he was never meant to leave. He was never meant to wake up. The gas station had claimed him, and now he would stand with the others motionless, watching, waiting for the next soul to wander through. And so, he stood still. His body was no longer his own. His eyes remained wide open, staring forward, fixed on the same empty horizon. Mark had become just another figure in the desert, silent, still, a part of the vigil, forever. Story 8. The gasoline curse. The night was hot, a stifling heat that seemed to cling to every surface, every breath. Cal, an overworked delivery driver, had been on the road for far too long. His shift was dragging on, and the miles of empty highway seemed to stretch endlessly before him. He had been driving through California's Central Valley, the dry, cracked landscape making it hard to focus. But he needed to get to the next town before his fuel ran out. His truck was an old beast, loud and steady, with the kind of rattle that only came from years of service. It had been a reliable workhorse for him, hauling supplies across the state for nearly a decade. But now it was beginning to show signs of its age, with the engine sputtering from time to time and the fuel gauge hovering dangerously close to It was about 2 a.m. when he spotted the small gas station off the highway. There was a single street lamp casting a dim light over the faded sign. Mile marker 119 gas and convenience. The gas pumps were old, their metal casings rusted from years of exposure to the harsh desert winds. Still, it was the only place for miles. Cal had no choice but to pull in. The station looked deserted. There was no one at the pumps, no cars in the lot. A slight breeze stirred the dried dust on the ground, and the air felt thick with the remnants of the day's heat. He pulled his truck to a stop and stepped out into the silence. The door to the convenience store creaked open, and a man emerged from the shadows. He was tall, gaunt, with a thin face and sharp, angular features. His clothes were simple, a faded blue jumpsuit with a patch on the chest that read Wade. His eyes were dark, sunken, and didn't seem to blink as he regarded Cal. "Need some gas?" the man asked, his voice raspy, like he hadn't spoken in days. "Yeah, I'm almost out," Cal replied, eyeing the pumps. He felt a twinge of discomfort, but he chalked it up to exhaustion. The man gestured toward the nearest pump. "You've got to pay first," he said. his eyes narrowing as he spoke. There was something off about the way he looked at Cal, something predatory. "No problem," Cal said, his throat dry. He dug into his pocket for his wallet, but before he could pull out a card, the man spoke again. "Cash only," Wade said flatly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Cal hesitated for a moment. The station was too remote to turn down, and it wasn't like he had a choice. He pulled out some crumpled bills, handed them to Wade, and turned toward the pump. The man didn't take the money immediately. He just stood there, staring at Cal with that unsettling gaze. "I'll be back with your change," Wade said. But before Cal could respond, the man vanished back into the store. Leaving the door to swing shut behind him, Cal watched him go, wondering if he had imagined the eerie intensity in the man's eyes. Something about the whole place felt wrong, but he needed fuel to get back on the road. He could think about it later. As he began filling the truck, he noticed something strange. The gasoline, normally clear, was darker than usual, and inky. Blackness swirling inside the nozzle. The fuel hissed as it poured into the tank, but there was an unnatural thickness to it, almost like it didn't belong. He stopped, the nozzle clattering against the pump, his hands trembling slightly. "What the hell?" he muttered, shaking his head. Before he could think further, Wade returned, carrying a greasy bag in his hands. He handed it to Cal without saying a word, his eyes fixed on the gas pump. "Everything's good?" Wade asked, his voice now strangely quiet. "Yeah, just ... The fuel looks weird." "It's not right," Cal said, stepping back from the pump and eyeing the black liquid. Wade's lips twitched in what could almost be called a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's just from the underground tank. It's old, sometimes. It looks like that." His voice was unnervingly calm. Cal didn't feel comforted by the explanation. "Right, well, I'll just be on my way." Wade nodded slowly. "Of course, you'll need it." As Cal closed the gas cap and prepared to leave, he felt the distinct sensation that Wade was watching him. The man's gaze was intense, almost predatory, but Cal didn't want to make a scene. He got into his truck, started the engine, and backed out of the station, glancing back at the small, faded sign that had seemed so innocuous when he'd first pulled in. The road stretched out before him, the tires humming on the empty highway. He tried to shake off the strange encounter, but it lingered in the back of his mind. The air outside the truck seemed to shift, as if the temperature had dropped a few degrees, and the night felt more oppressive than it had moments ago. Still, he pressed on, the rhythm of the truck lulling him into a sense of normalcy. But then something happened. His engine sputtered. The lights on the dashboard flickered and died, plunging him into complete darkness for a moment. The truck jerked, as if it were about to stall. Cal slammed his foot on the gas pedal, but nothing happened. The truck coasted to a stop in the middle of the highway. "Come on," he shouted, banging his fist on the steering wheel. He tried to restart the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. He was stuck. The gas station was far behind him now, swallowed by the emptiness of the road. He didn't want to go back, but he had no choice. If he didn't make it to the next town, he would be stranded in the middle of nowhere. With a groan, he threw the truck into reverse and started driving back. It was the longest drive of his life. The desert seemed to stretch out even further as he retraced his path. The road that had seemed endless now becoming claustrophobic and oppressive. When he reached the gas station, it was still there, sitting quietly in the dark like a forgotten relic of a past age. The lights flickered again, casting long, eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. He pulled up to the pumps, staring at the dark, empty station. He stepped out of the truck and approached the convenience store. This time, the door was already open, and Wade was standing just inside, watching him with that same unsettling stare. "You've come back," Wade said simply. "Yeah. I don't know what happened," Cal stammered. "My truck's dead. It just stopped." Wade didn't respond at first. He just stood there, motionless, his eyes never leaving Cal's face. The air around them seemed to grow heavier. "You used the gasoline," Wade said slowly, his voice carrying a strange weight to it. "Yeah, I did. But what does that? Did you feel it?" Wade interrupted, his voice low, as if speaking to a child. "The weight, the heaviness, that's the curse. You see, it doesn't just fuel your truck, it takes something from you. You don't get something for nothing." Cal's stomach churned. His mouth went dry. He had thought something felt wrong, but this was worse than he could have imagined. "I don't understand," he muttered, backing away slightly. Wade stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "It's not just fuel. It's something ancient, something that has been buried beneath this station for years. When you take it, it takes a piece of you. You can never leave the desert once you've used it." Cal's heart began to race as he looked around. The air felt colder now, almost suffocating. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice cracking. "You'll see soon enough," Wade said with a smirk, his thin lips curling into a grin. "The curse has already begun." Before Cal could respond, the ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble, and he heard the faintest whisper, like a low hum carried by the wind. He turned in every direction, but there was nothing to see. The gas station looked the same dilapidated, empty place it had been earlier. Yet now, it felt like it was closing in on him, like it was part of something much bigger, something that he couldn't escape. The hum grew louder, and he realized with a sinking feeling that it was coming from the pumps. The black gasoline. It wasn't just a substance, it was alive. It was waiting, watching, feeding on him. His breath caught in his throat as the station seemed to warp, its outlines flickering like a mirage, distorting as if time itself was unraveling. His body began to shake, and his mind raced as the horror of what was happening to him became clear. "You should have left," Wade whispered, his voice a low, almost affectionate murmur. "Now you're a part of it." Cal's vision blurred, and the world around him seemed to bend and twist. He tried to move, tried to run, but his legs felt like lead, his feet glued to the cracked pavement. It was as if the ground itself was holding him in place, forcing him to witness the horror he had unleashed. And as the black gasoline slowly oozed out from the pump, creeping toward him, he realized that he would never leave. The curse had claimed him. He had taken something he shouldn't have, and now he was trapped in this cursed place, this gas station that existed outside of time. Wade's figure faded into the darkness, leaving Cal alone, standing frozen in the middle of a nightmare he could never escape. And in the distance, he heard the hum again, louder this time, as if the station was calling for him. Story 7. The Unseen Driver. It was the kind of night where the stars felt as though they were too far to reach. The air had a strange chill to it, and the wind whispered over the highway, curling through the empty roads of rural California. Aaron, a truck driver by trade, had been on the road for almost 18 hours. He had driven through the dense, endless expanse of California's winding back roads, taking freight from the city to a warehouse on the other side of the state. Exhausted, his eyes were beginning to blur, and the constant hum of his trucks engine felt like a lullaby, one that could pull him into an easy sleep if he weren't careful. But the road was quiet. Dead quiet. There were no other cars, no sign of life as far as his eyes could see. Just him, the dark sky, and the endless ribbon of highway. He had passed a few small towns a while back, and now he was deep in the wilderness, miles away from anything resembling civilization. A soft, low fog was beginning to settle, swirling across the road like some unseen beast waiting to pounce. As the hours stretched on, Aaron's eyelids became heavier. He could see the lights of a small gas station in the distance, its neon sign flickering faintly. He sighed in relief, grateful for the chance to take a break and refuel. His fuel gauge was close to empty, and his bladder was making itself known. He needed to stop. The gas station appeared before him like a mirage, solitary outpost in the middle of nowhere. It seemed odd that a place like this would exist in such an isolated area, but Aaron didn't think much of it. A few cars were parked in front, but there was no one around. The station itself was old, its neon lights cracked and buzzing, casting an unnatural glow across the cracked concrete and grimy windows. He pulled in, stopping at one of the pumps. The station had a peculiar, almost ominous aura to it. It felt wrong, like it shouldn't be there, but his exhaustion overrode any lingering doubts. He climbed out of his truck and stretched, letting out a long yawn before walking over to the pump that he began to fill his tank. He glanced around, noticing how still the place was. There was no one in the convenience store, no other drivers milling around. It was eerily quiet, the only sound the hiss of gas filling his truck. Then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed something strange. A car. It was parked at the far side of the station, facing away from him, but something was off. The headlights were on, casting long shadows across the lot. It was a sleek black sedan, something newer than Aaron's own truck. He didn't think much of it at first, but as he continued to pump gas, the oddity of it lingered in the back of his mind. It was still and silent, just like the rest of the station. The car was parked so far from the pumps that he couldn't see any sign of a driver. It looked abandoned, but that didn't make sense. Who would leave their car running in a place like this? Aaron finished filling the truck and turned to head toward the convenience store. He was in desperate need of a bathroom, but before he could take more than a few steps, he heard the sound of a car door opening. He spun around, expecting to see someone stepping out of the sedan, but the car was still sitting there, its headlights on, engine running. He waited a few seconds. Nothing. The door didn't swing open, and there was no movement in or around the car. He squinted at the sedan, a cold, creeping unease crawling up his spine. The windows were tinted, so he couldn't see inside, but the car was definitely running. He could hear the low hum of the engine from here. Shaking off the feeling of discomfort, Aaron walked over to the convenience store. He pushed open the door, and the bell jingled above his head, announcing his entrance. Inside, the store was dark and dimly lit. The shelves were sparse, only a few items here and there. There was no one behind the counter, no one anywhere. Aaron's unease grew. This place felt abandoned, even though it clearly wasn't. But what unsettled him most was that strange sense of being watched, like eyes were tracking his every movement. He had to admit, if the place felt ... wrong. He shook his head, trying to rid himself of the anxiety clawing at the back of his mind. He wasn't paranoid, he was just tired. His eyes were bloodshot, and his mind was beginning to play tricks on him. He grabbed a bottled water from the fridge and paid for it, then turned to leave. As he walked back out, He could still hear the hum of the car's engine. He could see the headlights reflecting off the dusty windows of the store, the sedan parked where it had been. But when he stepped back outside, something had changed. The car was closer now, much closer. He hadn't seen it move, but somehow it had closed the distance between them. It was now parked right in front of his truck, blocking his exit. The headlights blazed into his eyes, and he felt a chill run down his spine. He stepped forward, cautiously, trying to see if anyone was inside. That's when he heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible click. A sound like a door unlocking. Then the engine cut out, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The headlights flickered. For a moment before going completely dark, Aaron's heart skipped a beat. His breathing became shallow, his muscles tensing as he stood frozen in place. It was like the car was alive, watching him, waiting for him to make the next move. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He'd never been one to get spooked, but there was an undeniable weight in the air of feeling, of dread that was thick and oppressive. His eyes flicked to the convenience store, but it was still empty, still silent. No one was around. The car was still there, parked in front of his truck, blocking his only way out. And he could have sworn he saw movement inside, just a flicker, a shadow, against every instinct screaming at him to get back in his truck and leave. Aaron approached the sedan. He was close now, close enough to make out the faint outline of the driver's side window. It was tinted so dark that he couldn't see inside, but he could hear something, a sound. A muffled voice, a voice that didn't belong to anyone he could see. He reached for the door handle. As his fingers touched the cold metal, the car suddenly lunged forward, its tires screeching against the gravel, forcing him to stumble back in. Shock. The engine roared to life again, and for a moment, Aaron thought the car might drive right into him. But instead, it jerked to a stop, and the headlights flashed back on. The sedan's tires screeched once more, this time as it sped out of the lot and onto the highway, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. Aaron stood there, blinking in disbelief. Had that really just happened? He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He could still feel the sweat on his brow, the tension in his limbs, but it was gone now. The car was gone. His hands were shaking, and his thoughts were scattered. It wasn't until he returned to his truck that he realized just how far his anxiety had taken him. He was about to climb into the driver's seat when he noticed something on the side mirror. A reflection. He blinked, and then it hit him. The sedan wasn't gone. It was right there, in his mirror. But there was no one inside. Not a single soul in sight. The car was still running, parked just behind his truck, its engine purring as though it had never moved. His breath caught in his throat as he turned around quickly, expecting to see the car just a few feet away. But it wasn't there. The lot was empty, as it had been when he first arrived. Yet the reflection remained, a car, empty, watching him, the unmistakable shape of it, the headlights casting a harsh glow across the pavement. The figure behind the wheel was blurred, as if obscured by shadows. But it was there, watching. The reflection shifted, and Aaron could see, for the briefest of moments, a face in the passenger seat, pale, gaunt, and completely still. Then the reflection vanished, the car no longer there, leaving only the empty highway and the lonely gas station behind him. He jerked around, his heart racing, but the parking lot was still empty. The car was gone. The silence had returned. Aaron wasted no time. He jumped into his truck, slamming the door shut behind him, and without a second thought, he started the engine and sped out of the lot, his tires screeching as he tore down the highway, leaving the station and whatever strange force had been watching him far behind. But as the road stretched ahead, and the miles passed in the blink of an eye, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone, that something was following him, something unseen, something waiting, and no matter how fast he drove, it would always be right behind him. Story 6. The radio broadcast. It was just another routine night on the road for Jake. He was used to the long stretches of empty highway, the monotonous hum of the engine, and the occasional flicker of a lonely streetlight in the distance. Had been driving for hours, traveling between small towns in rural California, making deliveries for a logistics company that ran 24/7. As the night deepened, the road ahead grew even more isolated. The lights from the city had long disappeared behind him, and the only illumination was from his truck's headlights slicing through the darkness. He had hoped to make it to the next town before he needed to rest, but as the hours dragged on, sleepiness began to creep in. Jake glanced at the dashboard clock. It read 3:15 a.m. He hadn't seen another vehicle for miles. The isolation was starting to feel suffocating, and his eyelids were growing heavier by the minute. The monotonous rhythm of the road was beginning to lull him into a trance-like state, and his mind wandered to the day's events. When he'd picked up his delivery cargo at the last stop, his tired fingers reached out for the radio dial, hoping the sound of some music would help keep him awake. The dial crackled to life, and he adjusted it slightly, trying to tune in to something decent. The static was thick in the air, but soon enough, he found a station. The voice that greeted him was warm and inviting, but it had a strange, almost ghostly quality to it, like it was coming from far away. You're listening to 102.7 FM, and tonight we're doing something a little different, the voice said, the words cutting through the static. This is a special broadcast for the late-night travelers, the ones who drive through the dark when everyone else is asleep. I hope you're ready for a story of things that go bump in the night. Jake frowned. Something about the broadcast seemed odd. The voice was soothing, but there was an unsettling edge to it, almost like it was too perfect. He wasn't sure if it was the fatigue or the eerie tone, but he felt a chill run down his spine. The voice continued, almost as if it could sense his discomfort. Most people don't believe in the things that lurk in the dark corners of the world, but tonight I'm going to tell you about something that has haunted these roads for years. Something that has claimed countless souls who thought they were safe. You see, not every highway leads to the next town. Some roads lead to places where time stops, and where the living become the hunted. Jake's grip on the steering wheel tightened. The story sounded like something out of a horror movie, but for some reason, the voice didn't let up. It kept speaking, its cadence smooth and hypnotic, as if weaving a spell over him. The radio station began to flicker slightly, the static intensifying, but the voice persisted. Imagine you're driving late at night, just like you are now. The road seems endless, stretching far into the horizon. The sky is dark, and the world around you is silent. But then, you hear it. A noise, a soft crackle from the radio. At first, you think it's just static, but then the noise changes, and it's like someone is whispering your name. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He glanced nervously at the radio, his fingers tightening on the dial, but it was too late. The whispering began. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. His name, Jake. It was faint at first, but it grew louder with every passing second. Jake jerked his hand away from the dial, staring at the radio in disbelief. The whispers continued, as though someone was standing right next to him in the cab. He could hear it clearly now, even over the static. "Jake, you're not alone." He quickly looked around, scanning the empty highway. There was no car behind him, no one on the road. The darkness stretched on in every direction. He reached for the volume knob and turned it down, but the whispering didn't stop. In fact, it only seemed to get louder. "Jake, you're not alone. Don't trust what you hear. Don't trust what you see." The cold sweat began to bead on his forehead. His mind raced. Was this some sort of prank? Maybe someone had hacked into the radio station, messing with the signal. But the voice, it didn't sound like a normal broadcast. There was no interruption, no stuttering, just a smooth, continuous flow of words, almost like the radio itself was alive. Jake took a deep breath, his pulse hammering in his chest. He needed to focus. It was just a trick. He would ignore it, keep driving. He would make it to the next town, and this would all be over. But the voice wasn't done with him. The whispers continued, now louder than ever, almost deafening. "Jake, it's already too late. You've crossed the line. You're on the road to nowhere, and there's no turning back. The things that haunt these roads, they're waiting for you." Jake's hands trembled on the steering wheel as the radio broadcast shifted. The voice became more insistent, more chilling. "Listen carefully now. Every night, someone drives down this highway, just like you. But not everyone makes it out. Some of them, they disappear. Others, they end up like me." The static crackled again, and for a brief moment, the radio station seemed to go silent. Then, a new voice emerged, distorted, twisted version of the first one. A voice that sounded distorted, like it was coming from deep underground. "You see, I'm not just a voice," it said, the words laced with malevolent intent. "I'm the one who speaks to those who are lost. I'm the one who leads them down the path where time has no meaning, where the world fades away." You've heard the stories about haunted highways, haven't you, Jake? You've heard of the roads that don't end, of the places that exist between places, of those who drive forever, never finding their way out. That's where you are now, and there's no escape. You're mine now. Jake's blood ran cold. He could feel the fear crawling up his spine, a visceral dread spreading through him like ice. He was on the road to nowhere. The world around him began to feel wrong, as though the edges of reality were fraying. The darkness outside the truck seemed to grow thicker, suffocating, and he could feel the oppressive weight of it closing in on him. He gripped the wheel tighter, trying to steady his hands. The truck began to slow down, as if the engine itself was reluctant to continue. The road stretched out endlessly before him, but it felt ... different. The headlights no longer illuminated the way ahead. It was like the road had vanished, and he was driving through an endless void. "No," he whispered to himself, shaking his head. "This can't be happening." He tried to switch off the radio, but the knob wouldn't turn. It was as if it was frozen in place, locked into its position, forcing the broadcast to continue. "You can try to turn it off, Jake, but it won't stop." The voice continued, its tone growing darker with each word. "You're not in control anymore. You're just another traveler who's lost their way." Jake's breath quickened. His eyes darted around the truck's interior, his gaze shifting nervously from the radio to the darkness outside. His mind raced, trying to figure out what was happening. It was a trick. It had to be a nightmare. But when he looked back at the road, he saw something that made his heart stop. The highway was gone. It had vanished. The empty space ahead of him was filled with fog, thick and black. There was no sign of the familiar road he had been driving on just moments ago. The truck slowed to a crawl, and the engine sputtered, as though it couldn't even keep running. Panic surged through him. His hands were clammy, his heart thudding in his chest as he turned the steering wheel, trying to get control of the truck. But the fog closed in, swirling around him, obscuring everything. It felt as though he was trapped in a vacuum, his mind racing, his senses overwhelmed by the thick, suffocating mist. The voice, still crackling through the radio, now seemed to come from all around him, as though it were inside his head, whispering directly to him. "You've crossed the line, Jake. There's no way back. You're stuck here, with me." The truck lurched violently, and the radio went silent. For a moment, everything was still. The fog remained, but now, the world outside the truck was completely black, as though he were suspended in some strange limbo. The air grew colder, and Jake's breath fogged up the windshield. His heart pounding in his chest. He slammed his fist against the dashboard, but there was no response. The truck refused to move, as though it were frozen in place. The voice returned, no longer whispering, but loud and clear, as if it had taken on a life of its own. "Welcome to the road you'll never leave." The truck's engine began to whine, and suddenly the headlights flickered back on, illuminating something in the distance. At first, it was just a shadow, but then it became clearer. A figure standing in the road, illuminated by the harsh light. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The figure didn't move. It was a tall man, dressed in a suit, his face obscured by shadows, but his eyes. Jake could see his eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, locking onto him. "Get out of the truck, Jake," the voice from the radio said. Jake's hands trembled as he looked at the figure in the distance. He didn't want to get out. He didn't want to move. But he couldn't look away. With his heart pounding in his chest, he reached for the door handle, the fog pressing in on him from all sides. As the door creaked open, Jake stepped out into the cold, damp air, the mist swirling round his feet. The figure in front of him didn't move. Its glowing eyes stayed fixed on him, pulling him forward. And just as his foot touched the ground, the radio went silent. There was no more sound, no more voice, just the sound of Jake's footsteps in the fog as he walked toward whatever fate awaited him. Story 5. The shadows under the pumps. It was past midnight when Marcus pulled off the highway, the headlights of his car slicing through the inky blackness that stretched for miles. He'd been driving all day, but the desert roads of California felt endless. He hadn't seen a gas station in hours, and his fuel gauge was dangerously low. The tension in his neck and shoulders had been building, but he didn't want to stop too early. He had a tight schedule to keep. But now, with the needle on the fuel gauge dipping dangerously close to empty, he had no choice. The glow of a gas station appeared on the horizon, almost as if it had risen from the desert floor itself. It was a small, run-down place, with a flickering neon sign that barely managed to stay lit. The pumps were old, their paint chipped, and the station looked like it had been abandoned for years. But, at this hour, it was the only thing he'd come across for miles. He let out a sigh of relief as he pulled into the parking lot. The silence of the desert night seemed to swallow him whole. The only sound, the hum of his car's engine and the distant rustle of wind through the brush. Marcus stepped out of the car and stretched, feeling the aches in his back and legs from the long drive. The air was dry, the heat of the day still lingering in the ground, but the breeze made it bearable. He walked toward the pump, the crunch of gravel beneath his boots breaking the silence. He glanced around, half expecting to see someone, but the place was completely deserted. There was no attendant, no other cars, just the lonely pump standing in the middle of the lot. He shrugged it off and reached for the nozzle, but as his fingers brushed the handle, he noticed something strange. A shadow, black and stretching, was moving beneath the pump. He froze. The shadow didn't seem to make sense. It was too large, too unnatural for the low light. It moved slowly, like a living thing, crawling beneath the concrete. Must be. My tired eyes, he muttered to himself, trying to brush off the creeping unease that had started to curl in his stomach. He grabbed the nozzle and began filling up his car. But the shadow, no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, refused to leave his mind. It lingered in the corner of his vision, and whenever he looked down, it seemed to grow a little longer, a little more insistent. As the fuel began to click off, he quickly pulled the nozzle out of the car and set it back in place, his nerves on edge. He looked around again, but there was still no one in sight. Just the desolate gas station and the empty, sprawling desert stretching out in every direction. He walked toward the convenience store, hoping to find a drink or maybe a snack to shake off the uneasy feeling that was creeping up on him. The store door creaked open, and he stepped inside. The air was cooler here, but the place smelled musty, like something hadn't been touched in a long time. The shelves were filled with dusty cans and faded labels. There was a strange stillness in the air, as if the station hadn't been used in ages. Behind the counter, a man stood, staring at the wall. He was thin, his face gaunt and pale. His clothes were simple, an old shirt and jeans, but they were tattered, worn down by time. He didn't acknowledge Marcus's presence at first, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the wall. Hey, can I get a bottle of water?" Marcus asked, trying to break the silence. The man turned slowly, his eyes dark, almost sunken, and his expression unreadable. He didn't smile or speak, but he nodded and grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, setting it down on the counter without a word. Marcus paid, feeling the man's cold, vacant stare following him as he left the store. The unease in his chest grew heavier as he stepped back outside. He quickly made his way to the car, unscrewing the cap of the water and taking a long drink. But then, as his eyes fell back to the pump, he saw it again. The shadow was still there. It was bigger now, longer, stretching out beneath the pump, crawling like something alive. It was moving, but it wasn't like any shadow he had ever seen. It wasn't following the contours of the ground, it was slithering like a living mass, pulsating with a slow, rhythmic motion. He felt his stomach twist, a deep, primal fear gnawing at his insides. Marcus stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know why, but he had to get in his car and leave. Whatever was under that pump, whatever was moving, it wasn't natural. He reached for the door handle, but before he could open it, a sound echoed from the distance. A car engine. It was distant at first, but it grew louder, coming closer. Marcus turned to look, relief flooding through him as headlights appeared in the distance. A car was coming. He quickly slid into his seat, fastened his seatbelt, and turned the key. The car roared to life, and he slammed the gear into drive, ready to leave this strange, unsettling place behind. But as he started to pull away, he glanced into his rearview mirror. The shadow under the pump wasn't there anymore. He stared at the empty space where it had been, feeling his heart race again. It was gone, as if it had never been there at all. The pump looked completely normal now, just like any other gas station. He blinked, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Was he seeing things? A moment later, the car's headlights flashed past the rearview mirror, and Marcus felt a sudden sense of relief. The other car had arrived, and the strange feeling that had gripped him slowly began to fade. He looked back at the road ahead, trying to shake off the lingering dread, but the relief was short-lived. The other car, a dark sedan, had pulled up to the pump. Its headlights were on, casting long shadows across the lot, and it stopped right next to the same pump Marcus had just used. The figure inside the car didn't move. The window rolled up, and the headlights remained glaring, unmoving. The silence of the place felt unbearable now, and Marcus didn't know why, but he had to leave. He didn't want to be here any longer. He shifted the car into reverse, backing up slowly, but just as he was about to turn around and leave, something caught his eye. The shadow beneath the pump. It was back. But now, it wasn't just moving beneath the pump, it was moving toward the car. It slithered across the ground, extending itself, stretching toward the sedan in a way that seemed impossible. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It had shape, it had form, it was alive. Marcus's breath hitched in his throat. He couldn't explain what he was seeing, but every fiber of his being screamed at him to get out of there. Without another thought, he slammed his foot on the gas pedal and sped out of the parking lot, the screech of his tires echoing in the night. He didn't look back. He couldn't. His hands were trembling on the steering wheel, his heart hammering in his chest. He kept driving, keeping his eyes on the road, trying to shake the image of the shadow that had moved beneath the pump. After a while, he allowed himself to take a deep breath. Maybe it had all been a trick of his mind. Maybe the isolation had messed with his senses. He tried to convince himself of that, but the doubt still lingered. He pulled off the highway a few miles down, finding a small, quiet motel. He checked in quickly, almost without a word, and locked the door behind him once he was inside. The room was small, functional, with dim lighting, but it didn't matter. He needed to sleep, to forget about the strange happenings at the gas station. As he lay in bed, the events replayed in his mind over and over again. The shadow, the way it had moved, the way it had seemed almost aware, but as his mind drifted toward sleep, he convinced himself that it had just been fatigue. Nothing more. But then, as he closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep, he heard a noise, a faint scraping sound, like something dragging across the floor. He opened his eyes, staring into the darkness of the motel room. For a moment, everything was still, but then just at the edge of his vision, he saw it. A shadow, slowly creeping across the floor. No, it couldn't be. He sat up, his heart racing again. The shadow was growing, stretching across the room toward him. It wasn't just a trick of the light. It was real, and it was coming for him. Story 4. The Cursed Gasoline. It was a quiet, sweltering day in late summer when Trevor decided to stop at the small gas station off Highway 47. The car was running low on fuel, and the dry, flat landscape around him stretched endlessly in all directions, with not a soul in sight. He hadn't expected to see another station for at least another hour. So when the faded sign for Dusty's Fuel and Convenience popped up on the side of the road, it felt like a blessing. The station itself was small, tucked between a few weathered buildings and surrounded by a few aging, rusted cars that seemed to have been parked here long ago. Trevor turned the steering wheel, pulling into the gas station. As he rolled to a stop at the pump, he glanced at the surrounding area. The station seemed strange, even by the low standards of rural gas stops. The old neon sign above the pumps flickered intermittently, and the fluorescent lights inside the small store buzzed and hummed. But what caught his attention most was the air. It was thick, heavy with heat and an almost overpowering metallic smell. Trevor shrugged it off as he grabbed his wallet and stepped out of the car, shaking his head at the ridiculousness of his imagination. The place was empty. No other cars were around, and the small store next to the pumps seemed deserted. The only sign of life was the slow movement of the gas station's overhead lights swaying slightly in the breeze, casting a dim, erratic glow over everything. Trevor approached the pump and began to fill his car. As the gasoline poured into the tank, he glanced over at the convenience store again. The door to the store was slightly ajar, but there was no movement. It felt eerie, as if the place was forgotten by time. But he needed gas, and the next station was miles away. The last thing he wanted to do was get stuck here. After a few minutes, Trevor was done filling his tank. He stepped back and went to pay for the fuel inside the convenience store. But as he walked in, he froze. There was a man standing behind the counter. He was tall, wearing a faded blue jumpsuit with the name Dusty stitched onto the chest. His face was gaunt, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. He didn't look up when Trevor entered, his eyes fixed on the counter in front of him, as if waiting for something. Trevor cleared his throat, but the man didn't respond. Hey, can I pay for the gas?" Trevor asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. He didn't like how silent the place was, how strange the man seemed. The man's head tilted up slowly, as if Trevor's voice had disturbed some trance. His eyes were dark and hollow, not quite focusing on Trevor, but somehow managing to look through him. He gave a slow, almost deliberate nod and reached for the register. "Cash only," Dusty muttered, his voice dry and raspy, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. Trevor hesitated, unsure if he should even engage further. There was something unsettling about the man, his stillness, the blankness in his eyes, the way he didn't seem to acknowledge Trevor as a person, just a shadow passing through his little world. But Trevor was tired and just wanted to get on with his trip. He handed over the cash without another word. "Thanks," Dusty said, his voice low. But Trevor noticed something strange. Dusty didn't actually give him change, even though he had handed over more than enough money for the gas. The register was left open, the cash from Trevor's payment still lying untouched inside. But Dusty didn't seem to care. He turned away and began rearranging some items on the shelf, his back now facing Trevor. Confused, Trevor took the receipt, stuffed it into his pocket, and turned to leave. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing up, as if he was being watched by something unseen, something he couldn't explain. But when he stepped back outside, something more disturbing caught his attention. The gasoline he had just pumped into his car was thick, darker than usual. It was almost black, like tar, swirling ominously inside the pump. Trevor squinted at the nozzle. He had never seen anything like this before. The gasoline wasn't the clear yellowish liquid he was used to. It looked ... wrong. He reached for the nozzle to stop the flow, but before he could, the gas began to spill out of the car, pooling on the ground like liquid night. The dark substance seemed to spread unnaturally fast, as if it was alive, moving and twisting across the pavement. Trevor stepped back in horror. His stomach churned and his thoughts raced. This couldn't be happening. It didn't make sense. The gasoline had never done anything like this before. He turned back toward the store. "Hey," he called out, panic rising in his chest. "Something's wrong with the gas." But when he looked up, the door to the store was shut tight. The lights inside had gone out, leaving the gas station in darkness. The eerie silence that followed felt suffocating, and Trevor's pulse quickened. He stared at the pool of dark liquid spreading beneath his car. The air was thick, heavy, and tinged with the unmistakable smell of something burning. The liquid seemed to ripple, as if it were trying to escape, trying to drag itself into the ground without thinking. Trevor jumped back into his car. His heart raced as he started the engine, his foot slamming onto the gas pedal. The tires squealed as the car shot forward, and he didn't stop until he was well out of the gas station parking lot, speeding down the highway as fast as his car could go. The dark liquid still haunted his thoughts as he glanced nervously at the rearview mirror. The gas station had disappeared behind him, swallowed by the darkness. But even though the place was miles away now, something gnawed at him after a few hours of driving. Trevor reached a small town and decided to stop at a motel. Exhausted and shaken, he checked in quickly and threw his bags on the bed. His mind raced, and as he collapsed into the small, creaky chair, he tried to make sense of everything. Why was the gasoline black? What had happened at that station? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. He froze, the sound of the knock echoing in the quiet room. Who could that be at this hour? He wasn't expecting anyone. He stood slowly, his mind still in a fog from the bizarre experience at the gas station. As he opened the door, his breath caught in his throat. It was the man Dusty. The man was standing there, his face blank, his eyes empty. He wasn't holding anything, not even a suitcase or a bag. He just stood there, staring through Trevor as if he wasn't even there. Trevor's heart began to race. His voice barely came out. What are you doing here?" Dusty's voice was a soft whisper, barely audible. "You took the gasoline." Trevor's mouth went dry. "What do you mean? I just needed gas." Dusty's face twisted slightly, but it wasn't a smile. It was something much worse. A slow, deliberate movement that seemed to distort his features. "It's not just gasoline. It's cursed, and you took it. You've started something you don't understand." Trevor felt the cold grip of terror run through his body. What? What's going to happen to me?" Dusty stepped forward, his gaunt face inches from Trevor's. "You will see. You'll understand soon enough." Before Trevor could respond, Dusty turned and began walking down the hallway. His footsteps, slow and deliberate, like a man who knew he had all the time in the world. Trevor stood in the doorway, his heart pounding in his chest. He slammed the door shut and bolted it, but the weight of Dusty's words lingered in the air, suffocating him. "You took the gasoline, that night." Trevor couldn't sleep. Every creak in the building, every shift in the wind, seemed to be a warning. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind raced with questions. Why had the gasoline been black? What had Dusty meant by the curse? Was it just some twisted joke, or was something worse coming for him? Around 2 a.m., Trevor was jolted awake by a strange sound. It was soft at first, like a whispering breeze, but it grew louder, more insistent. He sat up in bed, his heart hammering in his chest. The sound was coming from outside his room. He cautiously got out of bed, his feet dragging across the cold floor, and crept to the window. He pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek outside. What he saw made his blood run cold. In the parking lot, the pool of black gasoline from the gas station had appeared. It stretched across the ground, slowly creeping toward his car. But this time, it was different. The liquid was moving, slithering like some massive creature, growing larger and larger as it spread. and from within the pool, shapes began to emerge, figures, dark, indistinct shapes that rose from the liquid. Their forms made of the same oily blackness, stretching and writhing in unnatural ways. They seemed to have no real shape, just patches of shifting darkness, their outlines blurred by the moonlight as Trevor watched in horror. One of the figures turned its head toward him, its black eyes gleaming in the dark. He stepped back, his breath caught in his throat. The curse had begun, and there was nowhere to run. Story 3. Gas station on the edge of the world. Jack had been driving for what felt like days, though in reality it had only been a few hours. The sun had set hours ago, and the only thing keeping him company was the rhythmic hum of his tires. Against a long stretch of California highway, he'd been on the road for a business trip that had already taken him far beyond his intended route. The job had run late, the workday had stretched longer than expected, and now Jack found himself in the middle of nowhere. The last few towns had been small, the kind where everyone knew everyone's business, and now he was on a deserted stretch of road, no other cars in sight. The landscape around him was vast and barren, the dry, cracked earth stretching into the horizon. The air in the desert was thick and oppressive, as if it wanted to consume everything. Jack hadn't meant to get lost. He hadn't meant to be out in the middle of nowhere, but somehow he was here. And now, the low fuel light on his dashboard blinked at him mockingly. "Just a few more miles," Jack muttered, squinting at the faint glow of what looked like a gas station in the distance. He hadn't seen anything in hours, and his fuel was almost gone. So, when he saw the small, dimly lit gas station appear on the horizon, he felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. It had to be. He'd have to stop, and then he could find the next town over and get back on track. As he neared the station, the first thing he noticed was the oddness of its location. The gas station was tucked between two jagged cliffs, its lights flickering eerily in the distance. There was no town nearby, no houses, just the station standing in the middle of the desert, like a forgotten relic of another time. He pulled in, the gravel crunching under the tires. There was only one other car in the lot, an old sedan with dusty windows parked near the pumps. Jack turned off the engine and stepped out, immediately feeling the dry desert air rush into his lungs. It was stifling, like he was breathing in the remnants of something dead. The gas station was old, its structure worn down by years of neglect. The pumps were rusted, and the neon lights above them buzzed intermittently, casting strange shadows over the parking lot. It was the kind of place you'd expect to see in an old horror movie, a lone station in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by empty darkness. Jack didn't like the look of it. There was something about the place that felt ... wrong. But his fuel tank was nearly empty, and he wasn't in a position to be picky. He walked to the nearest pump, inspecting it as he slid the nozzle from its holder. It was weathered, and the dial on the pump was cracked, but it seemed to be working. Just as he was about to start filling, the door to the convenience store opened with a creak. The attendant was an older man, his skin wrinkled and pale, as though he hadn't seen the sun in years. He had a ragged beard, and his clothes, old work shirt and faded jeans, hung loosely from his thin frame. He didn't look like he belonged here, and Jack couldn't help but wonder what someone like him was doing at a gas station, so far off the beaten path. The man didn't greet Jack at first. Instead, he simply stood in the doorway, staring at him with dull, lifeless eyes. Jack cleared his throat. "How much for a full tank?" The man's voice was gravelly when he spoke, like it hadn't been used in years. $30, he rasped. You want to pay now or later? Jack nodded, glad to have a straightforward exchange. Now works for me. The man took his money without saying another word, turning slowly and heading back into the store. Jack watched him go, uneasy but trying to shake it off. He didn't want to judge anyone. After all, the man was just doing his job. But still, something felt strange about the whole situation. He finished pumping the gas, but as he put the nozzle back, he noticed something odd. The gas wasn't clear like normal. It had a dark, almost oily quality to it. Jack frowned and squatted down. To look closer, the liquid shimmered, almost like it was reflecting the darkness around it. There was a slight shimmer, a hint of something ... wrong. He shook his head, deciding it was just the light playing tricks on him. Get it together, he muttered under his breath. As he made his way back to the car, he noticed the other car parked in the lot of sedan with the dusty windows. It hadn't moved, and he couldn't see anyone inside. It was strange. Who would leave their car here in the middle of nowhere, especially when there was no sign of life? Jack got into his car, his thoughts lingering on the strange atmosphere of the place. He hadn't seen a soul around, aside from the attendant, and even the car seemed to have been abandoned. He checked the rearview mirror, then started the engine. The car sputtered for a moment, but it roared to life, and Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. But as he shifted the car into drive, a strange sound echoed in the distance. It was low at first, a barely audible hum, but it grew louder, closer. Jack's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He glanced in the rearview mirror again, but the gas station appeared unchanged, dark, silent. The humming grew louder. Suddenly, the car shook. Jack's heart skipped a beat. The gas station seemed to shift, as if the land around it was warping. The lights above him flickered violently, casting strange, twitching shadows across the ground. The noise grew to a deafening roar, and Jack's car lurched forward, as though something was pulling him toward the station. He slammed his foot on the brake. "What the hell?" he whispered, staring at the strange distortion in his mirror. The road behind him seemed to bend and warp, the lights of the station twisting, like some kind of fever dream. His headlights dimmed, and then they went out completely. The car was plunged into darkness. He fumbled for the switch, but nothing worked. He tried the engine, but it sputtered and died. Panic started to rise in his chest. The humming noise was all around him now, vibrating through the ground beneath his feet, reverberating in his bones. He tried the radio, but it was nothing but static until, in the midst of it, a voice cut through the noise. "You shouldn't have come here." Jack froze. His breath hitched in his throat. It was a low whisper, distorted, as though it had come from somewhere deep beneath the earth. His eyes darted around, but there was nothing in sight. "Who's there?" he called, his voice trembling. The static buzzed again, louder this time, almost deafening. Then, through the noise, the voice came again, clearer this time. "You took the wrong road. Now you're trapped. You've crossed the boundary, and there's no going back." Jack's pulse hammered in his ears as his car's headlights flickered back to life, only to reveal something worse. The gas station. It wasn't where it had been before. It had shifted. The entire landscape had changed. The road was gone. The desert was gone. All that was left was an endless abyss, stretching out in all directions. The gas station floated in the middle of nothingness. The voice returned, this time louder, more insistent. "There's no escape. You're here for good, and the price you paid will be your soul." Jack screamed, his hands shaking as he tried to restart the car, but the engine refused to turn over. The lights flickered again, and then, suddenly, they went dark. All was silent. Then, the humming started, again louder now, all-encompassing. He was no longer in control of the car. The darkness pressed against the windows, and the static on the radio blared through the speakers like a warning. A shrill cry of the void dot. And then, in the reflection of his rearview mirror, Jack saw something that made his blood run cold. The figure, it was there standing just behind him. A silhouette, a shadow with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. It was watching him, but when Jack spun around, there was no one there. The door to the convenience store was wide open. It creaked in the wind. Jack's mind raced. He needed to leave. He needed to get out of here before whatever was lurking in the shadows came for him. But there was nowhere to run. The darkness, the hum, the distorted station, everything was closing in. And Jack realized with growing horror that he was trapped in this twisted version of reality. A place where time didn't work, where the gas station was no longer a stop on a journey, but a destination he would never leave. Story 2. The red light. Sarah had never liked driving at night. It was something about the endless stretch of darkness, broken only by the headlights of her car and the occasional flicker of a distant streetlight. It was unsettling. She much preferred the bright, busy energy of the day, the sun rising on the horizon, and the comforting hum of civilization. But tonight, as the clock ticked past midnight, she found herself driving down an empty stretch of road in rural California, trying to make it to the small town where she was supposed to meet some friends for a weekend getaway. She'd left the city late, figuring the highway would be quieter and she could make better time, but now she regretted that decision. She hadn't seen another car for miles, and the road seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, bordered by thick, dense trees and nothing else. The radio played softly in the background, but it couldn't drown out the silence of the empty highway. As she approached another bend in the road, she noticed the faint glow of a red light ahead, something strange in the distance. The light wasn't the usual red from a traffic signal or a distant house note. It was a strange, unnatural glow that hung in the air, casting an eerie, almost sickly red hue on the trees and road ahead. It didn't seem to be connected to anything, floating in the darkness, pulsating rhythmically. She slowed down instinctively, unease settling in her chest. What was that? She'd heard stories before about strange phenomena in rural areas lights that couldn't be explained. Ghostly apparitions that flickered in the corner of your eye. But she always chalked it up to urban legends. This couldn't be anything like that, could it? Curiosity piqued, Sarah decided to investigate. She hadn't seen another car in hours, and the highway didn't look like it had many exits or rest stops. Maybe it was some sort of gas station or diner. Places like that sometimes had odd lights. It was probably just a fluke. But as she turned off the main road onto a narrow dirt path that led to the source of the light, the feeling of unease deepened. The light grew brighter as she approached, pulsing like a heartbeat. It was coming from a small, run-down gas station. In the middle of nowhere, the station was old, far older than any of the other places she had seen along the highway. The building was covered in peeling paint, and the pump in front was rusty and out of place. The flickering red light was coming from an old, broken neon sign that read "All Night Fuel," though it barely lit up and looked on the verge of collapse. The sign's neon buzzed and flickered violently, casting strange, shifting shadows across the parking lot. Sarah hesitated for a moment. It felt wrong. The light too red, too unnatural. The gas station seemed abandoned, its windows dark and unwelcoming. But her fuel gauge was almost on empty, and there wasn't another station for miles. She could make the stop quick, get gas, and get back on the road. She told herself it was just an old station, probably no different from the countless others she'd passed along the way. Her mind tried to rationalize it, but the unease lingered. She pulled up to the pump, the tires crunching against the gravel, and turned off the car. For a moment, she sat there, staring at the building and listening to the eerie quiet of the place. It was dead silent, no crickets, no wind, no sounds of the night. Nothing but the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above her. After a deep breath, she got out and walked toward the pump. The air felt unnaturally cold against her skin. The pump stood there, alone, rusting, its nozzle hanging loosely in its holder. She reached for it and glanced toward the convenience store, wondering if anyone was around. Then she saw him. A man stood just inside the door to the store. He was tall, with a hunched back and shaggy hair, wearing a worn jacket. His eyes glowed unnaturally bright in the dim light, and he stared at her as if she were the only thing in the world. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, and she froze in place. His gaze seemed to lock with hers, cold and unblinking. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her with that eerie, unrelenting stare. It was as if he were waiting for her to do something. Hey. She called out hesitantly, unsure of why she was suddenly so nervous. "Are you open?" The man didn't reply. Instead, he slowly stepped back from the door, disappearing into the shadowy interior of the store. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. The silence was so thick it was suffocating. She looked around again. There was no movement, no sign of life beyond that strange man. She glanced back at the pump, where the red light from the sign continued to flicker and pulse in time with her growing anxiety. She didn't want to stay here any longer than necessary, but she needed the gas, and with the empty highway behind her, there was no choice. She grabbed the nozzle, inserted it into her tank, and began to fill up. Then, the lights above her flickered violently. She looked up, and for a brief moment, the lights went completely dark. The gas pump sputtered and stopped mid-flow, and the entire station seemed to fall into an oppressive silence. The cold air felt heavier now, like the atmosphere itself was pulling her into the darkness. She pulled her phone out of her pocket, but the signal was weak, non-existent, in fact. The screen flickered, and then, just as quickly as the lights had gone out, they came back on, stronger now, brighter. The red light from the sign flashed erratically, casting unnatural shadows across the parking lot. She finished filling the car and moved quickly toward the door of the store, determined to get inside, pay, and leave. Her heart was racing in her chest, her nerves on edge. But as she approached the door, she noticed something else. The door handle was locked. She tugged at it, but it wouldn't budge. Confused, she stepped back, scanning the building once again. That's when she saw it, the man. He was standing in the window now, only inches away, his face pressed against the glass. His eyes were wide and bulging, and his mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. His pupils had become wide black pits, and his skin had a sickly, unnatural pallor. He didn't blink, he didn't move. He just stared at her, his grin widening ever so slightly as she backed away. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and Sarah heard the low hum of static, like the electricity was beginning to warp. The ground beneath her seemed to vibrate ever so slightly, and the red light from the sign pulsed faster, becoming more erratic, more aggressive. Her breath quickened. Something was terribly wrong. Then she heard it. A voice, a whisper, "Get out." Sarah froze, the words sending a cold shiver down her spine. It was soft at first, like a whisper in the wind, but it grew louder, becoming clearer. "Get out." The voice came from inside the store, emanating from the shadows where the man had just stood. She turned quickly, her pulse racing, her hand already on the door handle of her car. Without thinking, she yanked the door open, slid into the driver's seat, and slammed it shut. She put the car in drive, hands shaking, ready to leave this cursed place. But as she looked back at the gas station, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The man wasn't standing inside the window anymore. He was standing in front of her car. The faint red glow of the sign illuminated his face, and for the first time, Sarah saw his eyes clearly. They were black, hollow pits, devoid of life, yet full of something, something sinister. His lips curled back in a grotesque grin, revealing yellow, decaying teeth. "You can't leave," he whispered, his voice coming through the static of her car's radio. She slammed her foot on the gas, the tires screeching as she sped away, not daring to look back. The red light from the sign flickered in the rearview mirror, its glow growing smaller with each passing second. But the terror in her chest stayed with her. Sarah drove for what felt like hours. The landscape remained the same, desolate, barren. There was nothing but the road and the oppressive darkness surrounding her. Her hands were still trembling, her mind racing with the images of that man, his eyes, his grin, his voice. But when she glanced in the rearview mirror once more, her blood turned to ice. The gas station was there. It wasn't behind her, miles away like it should have been. It was in front of her now, impossibly far in the distance, glowing faintly in the dark. The red light pulsed in time with her heartbeat. She slammed on the brakes. The road stretched on, endless dot, and the gas station stood at the end of it, waiting. The lights flickered, and the voice whispered again, "You're never leaving." Story 1. The midnight attendant Emily had always been the kind of person who took road trips by herself. The open road, the hum of the car, the feeling of endless possibilities, it made her feel free. But tonight, as the miles stretched on, beneath her tires, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She wasn't sure if it was the isolation of the empty highway or the fact that she had been driving for so long. But the darkness outside her car felt suffocating. It was almost 2 a.m., and she hadn't seen another vehicle for at least an hour. The road was long and desolate, a never-ending stretch of asphalt cutting through the deep, quiet wilderness of rural California. The only light came from her headlights, which illuminated the winding road and the occasional patch of dead grass. She didn't mind the solitude. She had always preferred the peace of a quiet drive, but tonight, something felt different. It was as if the world outside her car was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, in the distance, she saw it. A faint glow, barely visible against the dark horizon, a gas station. It looked small, isolated, and old, much older than the sleek, modern ones she was used to seeing. But at this hour, it was the only sign of life for miles, and she knew she had no choice but to stop. She slowed down as she approached, the car's engine humming softly, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The station was tucked between two small hills, the only thing visible for miles in every direction. As she rolled up to the pumps, she noticed that the gas station was surrounded by overgrown weeds, and the building itself was a worn-down structure that looked as if it hadn't been cared for in years. But it was a gas station, and Emily needed gas. She pulled up to the nearest pump and turned off the engine. The only sound now was the soft rustling of the wind through the weeds and the occasional creak of the gas station's old sign, which read "Midnight Fuel," flickering faintly. In the darkness, the flickering light cast long, eerie shadows across the lot. And for a moment, Emily just sat there, staring at the station. She felt an odd hesitation. Something about it didn't sit right with her. But her fuel gauge was dangerously low, and she couldn't afford to be picky. "Just fill up and go," she muttered to herself, shaking her head. She wasn't the type to get spooked easily, so she grabbed her purse and stepped out of the car. The air outside was cold, dry, and smelled faintly of gasoline and old wood. She walked to the pump, but just as she reached for the nozzle, she froze. The door to the small convenience store creaked open, and a man stepped out. He was tall, with pale skin and dark hair, wearing an old, faded uniform with a name tag that read Mark. He was thin, almost too thin, his face gaunt and unshaven. He didn't look at Emily right away. Instead, his eyes lingered on the gas pumps, as if lost in thought. His movements were slow and deliberate, and Emily felt a shiver creep up her spine. She hesitated before speaking. "Hey, I'll just be filling up." The man didn't reply. He only gave a slow nod, his eyes still fixed on the pumps. Emily tried to brush off the odd sensation in her chest, but the unease was hard to ignore. She returned to the pump and inserted the nozzle into her car. The gas clicked on, and she waited for the tank to fill. As the gas flowed, she glanced around. There were no other cars in the lot, no lights from nearby houses or buildings. The only sign of life was the man standing near the door of the store, watching her. Do you get a lot of people stopping by this time of night?" she asked, trying to make conversation and push away the strange feeling. The man didn't immediately respond, but when he did, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "Not many. People tend to stave off these roads. It's safer that way." Emily felt a cold chill creep down her spine at his words, but she forced herself to smile. "Yeah, it's pretty remote out here," she said, trying to keep the conversation light. "I'm just passing through." He didn't smile back, but his eyes seemed to flicker with something she couldn't quite place. "Most people don't pass through here," he said cryptically. "They stay, or they disappear." The words sent a jolt of unease through her. She glanced at him again, but he had turned his attention back to the door of the store, his expression unreadable. She decided it was best not to engage any further. The gas pump clicked off, signaling that her tank was full. Emily quickly removed the nozzle and returned it to the pump, her movements a little faster now. She paid at the register, trying to ignore the strange feeling that had settled in her gut. When she turned to leave, she noticed that the man was still standing in the same spot, watching her with that blank, hollow expression. "Thanks," she said, trying to keep her voice steady as she walked back to her car. But the man didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at her as she got in and started the engine. She drove off, the headlights cutting through the darkness as she made her way back onto the highway. But even as she put distance between herself and the gas station, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She couldn't quite explain it, but the encounter with the man had left her feeling uneasy, like she had stumbled into something she wasn't supposed to. As the road stretched out in front of her, she tried to push the thoughts out of her mind. "It's just a weird gas station," she told herself. Nothing more, but no matter how hard she tried, She couldn't rid herself of the feeling that the place had been more than it seemed. She glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the glow of the station behind her, but there was nothing, just the empty road. She felt a brief wave of relief wash over her, but then something strange happened. The red light from her dashboard flickered. Her eyes widened as she glanced at the gas gauge. It was still full, but the red light continued to flicker intermittently. She reached down to check the fuel gauge, and that's when she noticed it. The needle had begun to move very slowly, as if it were draining. Even though her tank was full, her heart began to race as she glanced at the road ahead. But then, to her shock, she noticed something else. In the distance, faint red lights began to glow in the horizon. More gas stations, stretching out one after another, their signs flickering and buzzing in time with the strange, rhythmic hum in the air. They seemed to stretch on forever, endlessly, like some twisted version of reality. Panic surged through Emily's chest as she slammed on the brakes, but the car didn't slow down. The road seemed to stretch longer and longer before her, each gas station looming closer, their lights pulsing in an unnatural rhythm. The hum from the engine changed, growing louder and more erratic. She glanced in the rearview mirror again. The man from the station was there, now standing in the middle of the road, his pale face glowing in the dim light, his eyes locked onto hers. "Turn around," he whispered, his voice cold and distant. "You can't escape." Her hands gripped the steering wheel as the world around her seemed to shift, the gas stations multiplying, their lights flickering, casting long, nightmarish shadows across the road. "I need to leave," she whispered to herself, trying to force her foot onto the brake, but the car wouldn't respond. The engine roared in protest as the wheel jerked in her hands. Pulling her forward, the road stretched on, endless and unyielding. And the man's figure grew larger and larger in the rearview mirror, his eyes glowing brighter until they consumed the entire reflection. And then the red light blinked once more,